We've been working our way through the book of Ruth. Today we're getting to the conclusion of Ruth chapter 4. You're going to notice that the office I've been sitting in changed again. I just can't figure out the echoing audio. It probably is going to take some changes of that office to make it give me some more sound quality. So I've moved back to my original spot of videotaping. Either way, we're working through the book of Ruth. So I just wanted to let everybody know why there had been that change. But through the book of Ruth, right, we left off last time where I'd read to you this portion of Ruth is where we let off last time from Ruth chapter 4, verse 11. It said, "Then the elders and all those at the gate said, 'We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah.'" Now, I think it's important that we understand what this blessing means. Right? So to understand that, first we'll go to the first part of the blessing, right? The first part is may the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. If you don't know the story of Rachel and Leah, you can find it in, Genesis chapters 29 and 30. And it does go further than that, but the main highlights of that story are in Genesis 29 and 30. And the story goes like this, and I'm going to give you a very abridged version of it. But the man Jacob, right, Jacob, who is the son of Isaac, had gone out to find a wife. And he went into the land where Laban lived, and he went to work for Laban for 7 years. He made an agreement with Laban that if he would work for him for 7 years, that in return he would give him the younger daughter, Rachel. And so after that 7 years came, there was a wedding feast, and Laban pulled some trickery, and Jacob had said to Laban, "Give me my wife." He didn't say, "Give me Rachel." He said, "Give me my wife." And so Laban gave him Leah, and he went and laid with her and consummated the marriage. And when he woke up the next morning, he went, "Whoa, time out. This isn't what I asked for. I asked for Rachel. That's what you told me." And he goes, "Well, our custom here isn't to give the youngest daughter first, but the oldest daughter. So finish out this week with Leah, the marriage week, and then I'll also give you Rachel." And so Jacob agrees to it because he's in love with Rachel. And a week later, Laban agrees to give Rachel to Jacob as long as he is willing to give him 7 more years of labor. So within about a 2-week span, Jacob actually marries Leah and Rachel. A lot of people will say that he worked 7 years, got Leah, and then worked another 7 years and finally got Rachel. But that's not what our text in our Bible tells us. It says that after the week, he received Rachel and then worked for him for 7 more years. But either way, God sees that Jacob does not love Leah. And so it says in Genesis that God opened Leah's womb to have children. And so Leah bore 4 sons to Jacob. Rachel was unable to have children at that time. And so Leah had 4 sons to Jacob. Their names were Reuben, Simeon, Levi, which, if you remember, the Aaronic priest line comes through Levi, and Judah, which is the house which later David and Jesus come through as the house of Judah. So after Leah's had these 4 children, Rachel's kind of upset that she can't have any children. So she yells at Jacob, and Jacob says, "Man, who am I? Am I God? Like, I can't decide if you can have babies or not." And so Rachel gives her maidservant, sound familiar, like Abraham and Sarah, gives her maidservant, her name's Bilhah, Bilhah. This is Rachel's maidservant given to her by her father when she is married to Jacob. She gives Bilhah to Jacob and says, have children through my maidservant. So concubine, essentially. So Rachel's maidservant Bilhah has two sons named Dan and Naphtali. So these are two more sons of Jacob. We're up to 6 total sons now. And so, not to be outdone, Leah doesn't seem to be able to have children anymore. And so Leah also gives her maidservant over to Jacob, right? And her maidservant ends up having 2 children as well, 2 boys, and their names are Gad and Asher. So now we're up to 8 sons, 4 from Leah, 2 from Rachel's maidservant, and 2 from Leah's maidservant. Later on, Leah's son had gone out and picked her some mandrake, and Rachel wants the mandrake because mandrake is believed to give you the ability to open your womb and give you pregnancy. And so Rachel gives away her time with Jacob and says, yeah, he'll come lay with you tonight, Leah, if you give me the mandrake. Essentially, she's trying to figure out ways to get pregnant. And so Jacob goes to be with Leah because Rachel says, nah, you're going to go lay with her. I traded off my time, essentially. And he goes to lay with Leah, and Leah once again becomes pregnant. And her son that is born to her at that time, she names Issachar. She ends up having another son, Leah does, and she names him Zebulon. And she also has a daughter named Dinah. Now, through all this, Rachel has no children with Jacob. Eventually, our Bibles tell us that God remembered Rachel, and he had pity on her, and so he opened her womb, and she had Joseph. This is all through chapter 30. So Jacob has 11 sons at this point in time and 1 daughter. Now later, right, a lot of times we hear the story about Joseph, and we all know who Joseph is, and Joseph is the final son that's brought forth here in chapter 30 of Genesis. And many times people say, well, Joseph was the youngest son, but that's not actually true. Benjamin was the youngest son. In fact, Rachel dies giving birth to Benjamin in about Genesis chapter 35. But the point is the blessing, right? I needed to go through that so you could see this is how the tribes of Israel came to be, right? It's still going to be like 400 years later, but it's going to be a while. 400, 450, 500 years, somewhere between them, before those sons are known as the tribes of Israel. And they're the ones that come up out of Egypt and eventually become the great nation that God had promised to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob. Right? You got to read through all of it to understand it completely. But what the elders are trying to say when they gave this blessing as witnesses is that, can your children become a great nation? And Israel, remember, they're living in the time of Judges, and things are kind of rough and not going well. Right? They've lost their way towards God, and certain parts of the country are okay, other parts are not real good. They're saying, hey, may the children that your wife, that you're taking into your home, Ruth, be a blessing to the nation. And then they also say another thing that's kind of interesting, right? That they say, may they also be like Perez. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, who Tamar bore to Judah. Now that's an even stranger story, and I'm going to keep it short, but Judah, when he was a little bit older, after Joseph had been sold into slavery into Egypt, Judah went into the land of Canaan, and he married a woman. Married a Canaanite woman. And Judah had 3 sons through the Canaanite woman. The oldest son, he ended up being married to a woman named Tamar. Now the oldest son was found wicked in God's eyes, and so the Lord let him die. And the second son, who was supposed to do his duty and take care of his brother's wife, didn't want to. I'm not going to tell you the particulars of that story, but God was very upset with him not following the law once again, and so he let him die. And then Judah makes this promise to Tamar. He says, go home and be a widow in your father's home, and when my youngest son, Shelah, is old enough, he will become your husband. Well, after Shelah grows up, he never follows through on this promise, and eventually Judah's wife dies, and after he gets done mourning, he goes and Tamar disguises herself as a prostitute, and Judah sleeps with her. She ends up having twin sons, and one of those sons is Perez. Now Perez becomes the leader of the top clan in the tribe of Judah. So Perez becomes a pretty important person along the way. He's the head of the clan of Judah. So not only are they saying, hey, can this nation be built through your children and Ruth's children, but may they become famous everywhere. Right? Ephrathah, which is mentioned, right? That's that region surrounding Bethlehem and Bethlehem itself. And in fact, they're saying, can your children be as popular as Perez? And Perez is well known as a great man in the tribe of Judah and is the head of the tribe of Judah for quite some time. These are the blessings that they're putting upon their children. I think it's interesting because all that's going to come true. All the things that the witnesses say unto Boaz and Ruth are going to come true. Let's read on from verse 13 to the end of the chapter, and we'll see those things come to fruition. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. Then he went out to her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. Then Naomi took the child, laid him in her lap, and cared for him. The women living there said, Naomi has a son, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. This then is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, Boaz the father of Obed, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the son of David. Right, they come together and the Lord blesses Ruth and Boaz with a son. Right, and this is the part, right, because for all inheritance sake, Obed is now the kinsman redeemer. He is going to be the one to carry on the rights of Mahlon, to inherit the family land, to inherit the family name, to be the oldest, to be the one that heads his clan. And so it's a blessing not only to Boaz and Ruth, but it's a great blessing to Naomi as well, because she can see that their bloodline isn't going to fall away. Now, isn't that interesting? You might not think so, but I find it extremely interesting. Right? Because if we go back all the way to the beginning of the book of Ruth, right, the beginning of Ruth is kind of sad. Right? There's a lot of emptiness there. Things aren't good in Bethlehem. There's a famine. They leave their home and they go to Moab. And Naomi's husband and her sons all die. It talked about Naomi's emptiness and her bitterness. But God works everything. Right? Our Bibles tell us that God does everything for his good, so that all things may glorify him. God takes bad situations and bad choices that we make as people, and he works them out for good. Right? I can say that about my own life. I'm not going to go into any great detail at this moment about it, but I can tell you as a witness to that, that even though I've made some horrible choices in my life and put myself in some bad places, that God in the end has always used those for his good and to his glory at the end of the day, because I lived through them to be able to come and show how God saved me out of those situations. And so we see that through Naomi too, and through Ruth. Because at the end of the book of Ruth, we see the fullness of God's love in Naomi's life, right? He didn't leave her behind. He didn't leave her to whatever fate those may think were coming to her. He gave her a grandson that she could love and hold and grow. And in fact, he did more, right? Because Obed was the grandfather of King David. Right? Remember those blessings they put him on him, that he would be as famous as Perez? Well, I'll tell you what, if you're the grandfather of David, you're going to be a pretty famous guy, right? Because under King David, when we started this out, we're in the time of Judges and things are bad and terrible. And under King David is the first time in the nation of Israel that the nation is one. Because David did what Boaz did. He selflessly served God. Did David make mistakes? Absolutely. Did God take those mistakes and make them work for good to his glory? Absolutely. A great nation was built up underneath David and his son Solomon. Hezekiah, a great king, right? All these great kings. And finally, we go down through the genealogy and we come to the greatest king of all, King Jesus. And through King Jesus, entire generations of brothers and sisters in God have come to be. Right? That great blessing that is given. May your children that she bears be like those of Rachel and Leah that built up a great nation. And that's part of where we live right now. Right? We're part of that line that came through Boaz and Ruth, because we're sons and daughters of Jesus Christ. When we accept the sacrifice that he made on our behalf, when we accept the fact that he died for us, that he redeemed us, that he paid the price for our sins, then we become the sons and daughters of him. And so you can see how that blessing carries through all the way through the time of Jesus and beyond. And I find that to be very interesting. Have you ever taken a look, right? We see this genealogy, and when we see different genealogies throughout the Bible, a lot of times they're 10 people in succession. A lot of times they're men, and we can see the bloodline of Jesus, right? We can see the genealogy of them in the book of Matthew chapter 1. The first thing Matthew does is he goes through the genealogy, starting with Abraham, going down through Judah and through Perez and through Obed and through Jesse and through David and all the way down to Jesus. In the book of Matthew, it gives us his, Joseph's bloodline, because Joseph is really the legal father of Jesus, right? Because he's the husband of Mary. And then Luke also provides us with a genealogy. You'll find that in Luke chapter 3. And it's interesting when you look at those two genealogies, because they're not the same. Luke does it in the opposite direction, right? Luke goes from Joseph backwards, but he doesn't actually start with Joseph, right? Luke's quote is, And the father, Joseph, was Joseph, so it was thought. And then he goes through this genealogy, and the interesting thing is he goes all the way back to Adam, Luke does, where Matthew's only starts with Abraham. But we see the genealogy of Christ's bloodline in that genealogy, which actually comes from Mary. Now that's unusual, but we also have to remember that the birth of Christ was unusual and that it was a virgin birth. But either way, we can trace it all the way back through our Bible to the very beginning. It's laid out for us, person by person by person by person by person, so that we can see God's great plan. Are there tragic tales amongst those? Yeah. Are there tales of people who forsook God and walked away from him? Yeah. But at the end, God always works for the good. And that's one of the big things I love about the story of Ruth. Right through the tragedy, through the heartache, through the not knowing how they're going to make it, right? Where are we going to get our food? Where are we going to get our safety? Where are we going to get our security? Right? At those times, there's not even a hope really of a future. And yet that future leads to Jesus. Wow. So when you're going through those hard times, we all do, all we can do is look to God and say, Lord, I don't know why I'm going through this time, but I trust in you. Lord, I'm not sure where this story's going, but I trust in you. Give me the humility. Give me the strength. Give me the hope to get through this situation, to see how you will be glorified in this situation, Lord. There's many stories just like that in the Bible. There's stories like that in everyday life that we live right now. Well, that's the conclusion of the book of Ruth. But next week's message is going to kind of tie into it, and we're going to talk about how is Jesus our kinsman redeemer? Right? That's one of the reasons we went through the book of Ruth, was to understand what a kinsman redeemer is. But we're going to go into a fascinating study and sermon on what does it mean when I say that Jesus is our kinsman redeemer. So I hope you'll join me again next week. Thank you for joining us through this entire series. And I hope that you'll come back again next week to find out why Jesus is our kinsman redeemer. May God bless you today. We'll see you next time.